Now let's look at a few of the photographers that are best known from their work in the FSA Project: Dorothea Lange, Walker Evans, and Gordon Parks. We'll start with Dorothea Lange. So Dorothea Lange was a California-based documentary photographer. These are examples of work that she did in California before she was hired by the FSA. And you can see by these photographs, she had a strong eye for compositional elements, contrast, repeated shapes, leading lines that organize a composition with a sense of boldness. And she also has this strong humanistic streak, a sense of purpose and direction in her photographic projects. Dorothea Lange is particularly well respected for the ability that she had to make a connection with her subjects. She gained people's trust. She treated them with respect. So the notes that she took in her interviews are part of the file, along with the negatives of the photographs that she took. So with this photograph, she took notes on who the family was, where they came from. They were living out of their car, and you can see just in the photograph a lot of evidence of the hardship of the life that they're living on the road here. After this photograph was taken, her notes reflect that she talked to the husband of the woman who's not depicted in the photograph, and that he asked her to take another picture with the baby's face cleaned up. So look at the difference between these two photographs. What you see on the right is the photograph that Dorothea Lange took after they had washed off the baby's face and where they're sort of smiling at the camera. The one on the right reflects how the family wanted to present themselves to the world, right? They wanted to sort of like sit up straight and kind of look cheerful, look nice for the photograph. But the picture on the left is the stronger of the two photographs. It's more clear in its composition. It has a sort of naturalness to it, and it's just kind of interesting to see these sort of different forces at work here. There's the way that the photographer tells their story, and there's the way that the subject wants to be represented. So that those two don't always mesh perfectly. And that brings us to the migrant mother. So this is the most well-known of any of the photographs from the FSA Photographic Project. It's an icon of photography in general and of the Great Depression. So let's look at a couple of elements that make this such a compelling photograph. So you can see that the framing is very close on the subject. It's very clear where our eyes are supposed to land. The facial expression is very strong. All the different elements in the photograph sort of lead our attention back to the face in the middle. And here's a close-up of the face so that you can get a really good look at that facial expression that's so powerful. Couple of details that people sometimes miss about this photograph. The infant on her lap, you can see the baby's face. You can also see that her hand is on a post that's holding up the lean-to, and the thumb has been retouched out of the hand because it was sort of a blurry, distracting shape in the photograph. These are outtakes from the contact sheet of that series of photographs that Dorothea Lange made with the mother and children. You can see that there are more pieces of evidence. Okay, in these photographs, you can see more of how they're living, and you can see that things are moved around a little bit. So she's actually trying. She's working at getting a good photograph that really tells the story in a compelling way. But the one that works the best turns out to be one that includes less detail and as a result, less distraction. The family was on the actual farm that they were doing the labor on, okay? And as migrant farmers, they weren't supposed to be camping on this land, so they know that they could be chased off of this land at any moment. So when you think of the qualities that make this photograph an icon, there's the simplicity of the composition, there's the compelling facial expression, but it's also part of a system of symbolism and ways of storytelling that were already in place in American society. And I'm referring to this tradition of representing the Mother Mary and the Infant Christ with two angels on either side. This tradition of representing the sorrowful Madonna. This is a convention that's very, very well established in American art. And to say that there are similarities between the migrant mother and representation of the Sorrowful Virgin is not to say that it is intentional on the part of Dorothea Lange. I wouldn't say that of the photograph, that it was intended to be that way. But when the photograph reaches the audience, there are certain reactions that are so deeply ingrained in us to certain kinds of images that are pervasive in our culture. That background that we bring to looking at photographs influences the reactions that we have to photographs in ways that are not necessarily conscious. The migrant mother photograph became well known right away after it was published, and very quickly became a sort of an emblem of the Great Depression and of what America had gone through at that time. This is from an exhibition curated by Edward Steichen at the Museum of Modern Art in 1962. Now, as well respected as Dorothea Lange was for the connections she made with the subjects of her photographs, it so happens that she didn't write down the name of the woman in the migrant mother photograph. But journalists tracked her down later. Her name was Florence Owens Thompson, and she lived a long life after this photograph. She made it through, and so did her children. But she was not happy about the effect that photograph had on her and her family. Florence Owens Thompson, when in her later years, she said, "That photograph never did me any good. I never made a penny off of it." And that's true. She certainly wasn't paid for becoming an icon of photography, of being the subject of a photograph. And it reminded her of a very, very hard time in her life. Her children tried to make the best of the situation as they grew up. Years later, that's one of her daughters on in the image on the right. So the photograph helped to bring attention to the situation of the migrant farmers, and certainly helped to bring the country together in looking at what we were going through in the Great Depression. But it turned a real human being into something else that she had no control over. Let's consider Walker Evans. So this photograph of a portrait studio in Georgia is it sort of symbolizes a lot of what Walker Evans is really well known for. He had a sense of detachment from his subjects. He sort of stepped back from his subjects in contrast to Dorothea Lange's wanting to really make connections with people. Walker Evans was also very interested in vernacular photography and in vernacular lettering and architecture. Walker Evans made many of these kinds of photographs that show vernacular architecture, the kinds of ways that people lived, the signage that surrounded them, and had a sense of deliberate composition and reserve. This photograph of a Bethlehem, Pennsylvania steel mill and all of the sort of surrounding town around it really reflects Walker Evans's sort of strategic approach to composition, where there's a place for the things, and the things are in their places, and they sort of imply in really subtle ways a sort of detached observation of the realities of people's lives and the sort of shadow that's cast over them by these big industries. Now, Walker Evans went to Hale County, Alabama, under the auspices of the Farm Security Administration Project, but also under contract to Fortune magazine. He went there with journalist James Agee to do this sort of in-depth study of a group of tenant farmers living in that town. So Walker Evans and James Agee spent a lot of time there, got to know the people there pretty well, and ultimately James Agee wrote a book about them called Let Us Now Praise Famous Men. And Walker Evans' series of photographs that he made for them, for the FSA, a selection of those photographs were published as part of that book. So this portrait is one of those photographs. When Walker Evans published those photographs in the book, the very first thing that you see in the book is this photograph of the landowner. All of the tenant farmers in this Alabama town all work for this one guy. In the photographs that Walker Evans made of the families in Hale County, Alabama, there are many photographs of the homes that they lived in. They were very rudimentary homes, as you can see by these photographs here. There wasn't even plaster on the walls. They're just made of wood with these extremely simple, rudimentary tools of life. Walker Evans is able to treat them with tremendous dignity in his photographs so that the photographs of these places look careful and clean and open and strangely modern. So these are really compelling, really beautiful photographs of places that to live in them was not a beautiful life. This was a really rough life that these people were living, and yet Walker Evans is able to make it look dignified in a photograph. And in the photographs that he made, there's evidence of the role of photography in these people's lives. He takes pictures showing the pictures that these people kept with them. So the book by James Agee, written by James Agee with photographs by Walker Evans, was published, but it was published years later. It wasn't published until 1941. It was immediately respected on a literary level and is now regarded as a landmark work in nonfiction writing. But Walker Evans was deeply troubled by the time that he spent there, just by the depths of suffering that he observed, and he never wanted to go back. Walker Evans's photographs were greatly respected as photographs. In fact, he had an exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art in 1938, and that was the Museum of Modern Art's first single photography exhibition. Okay, it was the first exhibition that they had that was devoted to one single photographer. And the monograph from that exhibition, a book called American Photographs, is still one of the most highly respected American photo books that are out there. And it's been through many editions since then. So Walker Evans's photography really blurs the lines between documentary for government purposes, documentary for journalistic purposes, and art that is also about the world. Okay, so these photographs that he made of Allie Mae Burroughs, I think, are a good example of that because they're in all of these different worlds. The one on the left is the one that's shown in Now Let Us Now Praise Famous Men. The one in the right is the version from that sitting that's in the book American Photographs, and his photography is respected from all of these different angles and works slightly differently depending on from which perspective you look at it.